Travel back in time with me for a minute. It's the late 80s, early 90s at the Walt Disney Studios. Beauty and the Beast is taking the world by storm. Aladdin's approaching the end of production. It's time to move on to the next projects. The animators are told we have two projects in the pipeline. Some of you are going to work on one, and some of you are going to work on the other. The first is going to be this dramatic musical retelling the life of Pocahontas and the first English settlement in America. It's going to be an epic, high-profile film, and all the higher-ups are banking on this being our next Academy Award for Best Picture nomination. The other, not as glamorous. It's basically Bambi with lions. Naturally, many animators flock to the former, and roughly 25 years later, how'd that work out for everyone? Well, I'm not showing Pocahontas tonight. Instead, I am showing you that second film, which we now know as The Lion King. Released on June 24th, 1994 as the Walt Disney Studios' 32nd animated feature, it was directed by Roger Allers and Rob Minkoff from a screenplay written by Irene Mecchi, Jonathan Roberts, and Linda Wolverton, with music from Hans Zimmer and songs by Tim Rice and Elton John. The film has an all-star ensemble cast featuring the voices of Matthew Broderick, James Earl Jones, Jeremy Irons, and Nathan Lane, to name a few. Production began on the film in the late 80s, and like most films, the original story treatment is nothing like the final product. The premise of the film was a battle between lions and baboons, Scar being the leader of the baboons and Rafiki being a cheetah. The story goes that Scar manipulates Simba into becoming a lazy, unlikable character and very easy to overthrow when he comes of age. When it was decided the film would be a musical, the original director, George Scribner, left the project due to creative differences. He didn't like the idea of it being a musical. And Rob Minkoff came on board to direct with Roger Allers. It was also at that time Beauty and the Beast and regular Disney producer Don Hahn came onto the project. He felt the script lacked focus and asked for a complete reworking. The final story draws a lot of inspirations from the works of Shakespeare, specifically Hamlet. But like many of Shakespeare's work, it intertwines the dark and tragic with comedy. In 10 minutes after there's a major death, there's a fart joke, so they definitely balanced it out. Apparently in the original, there were actual lines from Shakespeare, like when Scar, does that. He said, "Good night, sweet prince," but they cut those out. The roots of the story go much further than Shakespeare or Bambi. They look to the biblical tales of Joseph and Moses when crafting the story. A young leader leaves home, years later receives a sign he has to go back and fulfill his life's purpose. For Moses, it was a burning bush. For Simba, it was his father and the stars. There are also some ideas from the King Arthur lore, where there's a bad king, the land suffers. When there's a good king, the land prospers. The themes of the film are timeless. It's a coming-of-age story, a story of redemption and betrayal. It's a story about family and community and the responsibility we have to those, becoming a part of something bigger than yourself, and taking your place in the great circle of life. Our protagonist experiences life and death, happiness and helplessness, love and loss. He faces every aspect of reality, as one does when we go through life. Having said all that, the King of the Jungle had its title changed to The Lion King, one, because the story does not take place in the jungle and lions don't live in the jungle, and the production started gaining momentum. Regardless, many at the studio had little to no faith in this film. It was looked at as a movie nobody cared about, and there was little belief that anyone would see it. Pocahontas was the A production, and this was the B production. Many of the newer, younger animators were left working on The Lion King, and some wanted to jump ship and work on Pocahontas. Apparently, they had to beg people to stay to work on The Lion King. To be fair, on paper, Pocahontas probably sounded like the next logical step for Disney, with a more adult story, no matter how historically inaccurate it is, following the likes of Beauty and Aladdin. But Lion King has an incredibly human story, and the irony is there is literally no humans in it. At the time, people thought a film starring only talking animals was kind of a lower form of storytelling. But isn't the mascot of your entire operation a talking cartoon mouse? Just saying. Animators took a research trip to East Africa, exploring and photographing the country for about 2.5 weeks. One of the producers said the balance of life was really in your face out in nature, predators versus prey and such, which really drove home the themes of the film. They used a lot of bold, tense, vivid colors to reflect the real-life savanna. The studio brought in actual animals for the animators to study, courtesy of wildlife expert Jim Fowler. This was nothing unusual for Disney. For example, deer were brought in for animators working on Bambi, but a life-size lion is much more intimidating than a deer. One of the inspirations for the film's look was director David Lean's Lawrence of Arabia, especially when it came to sweeping, extreme wide shots of the countryside to convey the grand epic scale of the story. Disney continued to experiment with CGI in this film. They created a whole new program to create the wildebeest stampede. To put it in the most simplest terms, one rendering of a running wildebeest was animated, then they made a CGI model, then they duplicated that model like 1,000 times, and then they designated each one to run or move at its own specific pace, and that took about 3 years to complete. When Robin Williams took on the voice of Genie in Aladdin, it opened the doors for other big-name celebrities to be cast in animated films. This cast is filled with major actors and actresses, or at least they were major at the time of production. Ferris Bueller himself, Matthew Broderick, plays adult Simba, and Jonathan Taylor Thomas, who played Tim Allen's son on Home Improvement, plays young Simba. Moira Kelly plays adult Nala. James Earl Jones, the voice of Darth Vader, is Mufasa. Liam Neeson actually turned down the role when it was offered to him. Jeremy Irons played Scar. He actually smoked cigarettes during some recording sessions to help get into character. That's commitment. Tim Curry was almost Scar, but he had to turn down the role due to scheduling conflicts with Home Alone 2. Rowan Atkinson, aka Mr. Bean, was Zazu. Timon and Pumbaa are played by Nathan Lane and Ernie Sabella. Both of them auditioned separately, Nathan Lane for Zazu and Ernie Sabella for one of the hyenas. They were friends from being in Guys and Dolls together on Broadway, and the producers noticed their chemistry and then asked them to record together as hyenas. They loved it, cast them as Timon and Pumbaa instead. Those hyenas would eventually be voiced by Whoopi Goldberg, Cheech Marin, and Disney veteran Jim Cummings. They tried to get Tommy Chong to voice one of the hyenas to have a little Cheech and Chong reunion. Do you guys know who they are?
Yeah, we do.
I know you guys do. Okay, you do. All right. Well, anyway, Chong was unavailable. The film was originally not going to be a musical. They were looking at it as more of an animated National Geographic special. One day, Tim Rice came to the studio. He stepped in to help finish the songs on Aladdin after Howard Ashman died. And one of the producers asked him if The Lion King could be a musical, and he said, yeah, pretty much anything could be a musical. So they went, okay, let's songify this. Originally, to help him write the songs, Tim Rice reached out to ABBA. Mamma Mia, what a different film that would have been. But they were not available. He then reached out to Sir Elton John. Having a big-name musician work on an animated film wasn't common back then, but Elton saw it as an exciting challenge for this stage of his career. Fun facts, originally Timon and Pumbaa were going to sing the powerful love ballad, Can You Feel the Love Tonight? And Elton John was appalled at the thought of those two singing his love song. Disney chair Jeffrey Katzenberg didn't want Timon to dress in drag and do the hula to distract the hyenas. Instead, he wanted a John Travolta Saturday Night Fever-like disco routine. Nobody on the production team liked that, and they were like, well, Jeff, we'll just change it after the test screenings. But everyone in the test screenings loved it, so they couldn't change it. So joke's on you, Jeff. Composer Hans Zimmer worked on the music. You probably know Hans best for his work on many Christopher Nolan films. He originally didn't love the idea of scoring an animated film, but he really connected to the story because he lost his father at a young age. He called upon his friend South African composer Lebo M to add a sense of cultural realism to the music. Lebo is responsible for all the African choirs and chanting you hear in the beds of the songs and music, and he also opens the film. He is the voice you hear doing that iconic chant that starts the Circle of Life. Speaking of the Circle of Life, the film was originally going to open with just a simple dialogue scene until Elton John came on board, and shortly before the first trailer of the film was due for release, they decided to scrap it and instead simply show the Circle of Life sequence in its entirety. And I think that got people in the seats. They're all over the place. As production wrapped up, everyone began to realize they might actually have something really good on their hands. Meanwhile, over on Pocahontas, a story for another day. It's just really easy to make fun of Pocahontas. The Lion King was released in theaters on June 24th of 1994, and it was actually the first film I ever saw in theaters, and I still remember that iconic opening make me jump in my seat. and my tiny 3-year-old heart skipping a beat. It opened to massive critical and commercial success. Its lifetime box office gross is just shy of $1 billion. It was the highest grossing film of 1994, and for a short while was the second highest grossing film of all time. It is the highest grossing hand-drawn animated film, animation overall, it's 9th, and it is the third highest grossing film of all time for Disney. Suffice it to say, The Lion King proved an animated film could be a blockbuster. There was a remarkable merchandise campaign that included Burger King, Mattel, Nestle, and Payless. Disney took home about $1 million for merchandising alone. The home video release is the most successful of all time, so maybe hold on to those VHSs, they might be worth something. The film was nominated for 4 Golden Globes and 4 Oscars. It won the Globe for Best Picture, Musical or Comedy, and Best Original Score, and it won the Oscars for Best Original Score and Best Original Song for Can You Feel the Love Tonight. The Lion King was adapted into a Broadway musical in 1997, which is still running to this day and is one of the longest running and most successful shows in Broadway history. 2 direct-to-video sequels were produced, The Lion King 2, Simba's Pride, and The Lion King 1.5, as well as 2 animated series, Timon and Pumbaa and The Lion Guard. The film has had a few re-releases in 3D and IMAX format. The Lion King has had a major presence in Disney parks, from character meet and greets, stage shows, and parades. And of course, next week, Jon Favreau's remake will hit theaters and make all of the money. There's also been a long-standing debate of controversy that Disney ripped off an old anime series called Kimba the White Lion when writing the story for The Lion King. I'm not going to go into detail on that. I'll just show you that picture, let you do your own research, and draw your own conclusions. But also, Kimba and Simba. The Lion King was a major moment in Disney history and film history. If Beauty and the Beast or Aladdin didn't convince audiences an animated film could be as prolific as a live-action one, The Lion King certainly did. These 3 films have stood the test of time for audiences. Specifically, in the case of The Lion King, I think it was the timeless story and themes. Not to repeat what I already went over, but I think it all boils down to the idea of legacy. The legacy that is created and left for us, and the legacy that we create for ourselves and what we leave behind, or simply our place in the circle of life. So this concludes this sort of Cinema Series trilogy of presenting a Disney animated classic before its remake hits theaters. I probably won't do this every time there's a Disney remake, because at the rate they're going, I'd be presenting 3 to 4 Disney films a year. But there will probably be more Disney films presented here because, let's be honest, look who you've been listening to.